President Cyril Ramaphosa addressed the nation on Thursday evening and announced the closure of public schools from the 27th of July to the 24th of August, with some exceptions. Matrics will take 1 week off and grade 7s 2 weeks, while the academic year will extend into 2021. The president also announced severe consequences for any corruption related to COVID-19 relief funds aimed at the government's response to the crisis. Mixed reactions have erupted since the announcements after dominating discussions in recent weeks. Political analyst Professor Tinyiko Maluleke joins us to unpack this further. Professor, thank you for joining us on Weekend Dawn. Really appreciate it. Now, education being a big talker, private schools being treated a lot differently to public schools. What are your thoughts on that, closing for 1 month from the 27th of July?
Well, I think we have to appreciate that the president is responsive. There has been an outcry that something has to be done around the schooling, given the spike, incredible spike in the number of infections and deaths in South Africa. So he has tried to do something. But obviously, as you point out, there is incoherence. There are contradictions in some of his announcements. And the incoherence here is the fracture between private schools and public schools, and whether we should not actually treat all schools equally. And it's true that there are things to be considered regarding private schools, but the point is the coronavirus does not distinguish between public schools and private schools. The danger of the coronavirus is present whether you are in a private school or you are in a public school. It could be argued that some private schools are more capable of handling the social distancing and hygiene protocols better than public schools. But that shouldn't be necessarily the case in each of the schools. So, I think this is an incoherence. It's a contradiction. Just like we saw in his earlier address, where he spoke about taxis, local taxis traveling 100% when taking people around to places where they will not sit or they will be expected to sit with social distancing. So it's a huge contradiction. You can't blame him for not trying to do something, but you can blame him for telling us something that is contradictory and incoherent.
I think it's a situation of damned if you do or damned if you don't, because the likes of SATU were complaining that schools should close, while the opposition, the Democratic Alliance, is now challenging the president's decision to close schools. It seems as though whether he chooses to do something right or wrong, however you look at it, it's never right or it's never wrong.
Well, we need to distinguish two things. The one is a decision to close schools, which is, in my view, appreciated by many people. In fact, many people would rather have had him close the schools for longer. That's one thing. But the decision to close one type of schools and not another is yet another matter that is raising the ire of several citizens in this country. So I think we need to distinguish those two things as we discuss this matter. Closing schools, there are those who say, no, you shouldn't have done it. But I think the vast majority of South Africans appreciate the necessity. They could question whether it's long enough, the school closure. But I think the public versus private school issue is certainly one of incoherence and contradiction.
And do you think the announcement came at the right time, considering that the numbers are still rising?
Well, one of the strange things about this address is that although he mentions the rising numbers in the speech, he really doesn't expand on it. You wouldn't know that in 1 month we have risen by more than almost 50% in terms of numbers. In fact, less than a month, because July is not yet finished. You wouldn't know that in July alone we have risen to become the number 5 country in the world in terms of infections. So that is another story. I mean, there are 3 parts to his speech. The first part is the education system. The second part has to do with how well we have done. And I say that in inverted commas, because how well have we really done? So he talks about the money that has been distributed, and then, of course, the corruption part at the end. So I am not so sure that, the timing is right. I think that it's a little bit late. I just hope that it's not too little too late with the closure of schools. I wish he had closed all schools, to be fair, not just about competition between the two systems, simply because the coronavirus doesn't know that there is such a thing as a private school and such a thing as a public school.
I like that you actually led me to my next question about the COVID-19 relief, which has been extended, and that's what came out of the President's speech a few days ago. Are you satisfied with how the COVID-19 relief fund has been distributed across the country?
For the first time in more than 100 days, the President spoke about the corruption that is linked with the COVID fund in particular. But this has been a no-brainer right from the beginning. You will recall that when he announced the relief fund for the first time, there were two types of responses: those who were clapping hands and those who said corruption is coming. On the social media, in the main media, everywhere, people foresaw that corruption was going to come, and the President cannot be the only South African who did not realize that. Finally, he has come around, not only to recognize that corruption will come, but actually to acknowledge that it is here. And he did look visibly angry when he was talking about this. And so one is happy that the government has thought about relief for businesses, for individuals, for South Africans. But one is not happy that the corruption that has been predicted, nothing has been done proactively to try and prevent it and to control it. Only in hindsight do we begin to put processes in place to address the corruption that has really been shameless on the relief fund.
And he spoke mainly about how he appointed the likes of the SIU, the Hawks, Crime Intelligence, the SAPS Detective Service, and of course the South African Revenue Service. Do we have any idea if in the next 6 weeks, when they deliver a report, that anyone found guilty of maladministration or looting funds, especially funds that were meant to help assist COVID-19 relief, do we have any idea if these people will be held accountable and will maybe face any jail time?
I hope that will be the case, Jacob. I really hope so, because let's face it, this COVID-19 crisis has created a crisis of trust on government at several levels. There has been a crisis of trust because the security forces some of them have misbehaved during this time, and lives have been lost. A crisis of trust because there has been a sense that many of the regulations are tilted against the small person, the poor and the marginalized, the small business person, and so on. And so if nothing is done around issues of corruption, it will simply galvanize those sentiments that I have just referred to above. But I also am not incredibly trustful of the SIU system itself, because it does not have a glorious track record. And I know this is a new one. It's a special investigating unit that is new, but the instrument is not totally new. It's an instrument we are familiar with. And I find that it is a little sad that they have to do this in hindsight. Now they must go back. So we waited until there was corruption before we addressed it. And one hopes that as they go back to track it, it will have stopped, because they could end up chasing a moving target. So those who are corrupt will simply become more complicated, more complex in their corruption as the SIU goes back to track corruption that has been committed before. But one must not be too pessimistic. It is important that the president is upset about this, and not only upset, but he is trying to do something about it.
Professor Maluleke, thank you for your time. That was political analyst Professor Tinyiko Maluleke unpacking the announcements made by President Cyril Ramaphosa on Thursday evening.